Now, what one researcher told me after investigating this particular flu is that this is a subtype A influenza. It contains an enzyme called a polymerase, which exists in all subtype A influenzas, including the seasonal human flu, the current hybrid flu, and avian flu. It was determined that this particular flu was gene spliced from 2 forms of human flu, 2 forms of swine flu, and 1 form of human flu. The problem is when they looked at the molecular clock of this enzyme, they determined that it was rapidly mutating in humans. The problem with that is, of course, any new mutated version of this particular virus would be immune to any vaccine already created to handle the previous type of virus. So,
are you sure you can actually prove that, Wayne? Let me just interrupt you there. You're saying that this virus could actually be deliberately made to be vaccine-proof. I mean, how can I be sure of that?
Well, the research community has determined this, and the nightmare scenario, of course, is that these mutations would occur, and now we have reports from both Brazil and Germany that, in fact, this swine flu or hybrid flu, or what this Centers for Disease Control here in the United States called a novel flu, is in fact mutating and mutating rapidly in humans.
Well, of course, you describe this as a nightmare scenario, and where we have swine flu and bird flu joining together, mutating. Now, some watching this might say this is a load of nonsense, that pigs might fly indeed, but this really is a kind of flying pig flu, isn't it? But what would you say to those who say this is nonsense and can't happen?
Well, the information I received from influenza researchers in May seems to be coming true. The two predictions made were that it was going to mutate. That, in fact, is now happening based on the reports out of Brazil and Germany. The other thing is that the prediction was in a couple of months, most countries in the world would be experiencing cases of flu, and within the last couple of days, we now have the first cases being reported in the South Pacific and Africa, in Ethiopia, Cape Verde, Ivory Coast, and fairly remote places like Vanuatu and Samoa and Papua New Guinea. So the predictions are holding true from what I was told by researchers in May.
And you're also claiming, Wayne, just finally, that the World Health Organization is aware of this nightmare scenario, as you call it, and is actually suppressing all this. Now, how do you know that, and why would they be suppressing such an alarming situation if it is true?
Well, I was told by the research community that there were 2 meetings on this particular strain of flu, one in Vietnam and one in Hong Kong. Both of those were unusually closed to the public and to the press. That was a unique situation. The other thing is that we may be on something here that begs of a criminal investigation. The 4 labs that I was told are involved in this development, the genetic development, this particular influenza, are the Biosafety Level 4 laboratory at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, the Armed Forces Pathology Institute in Rockville, Maryland, and the U.S. Army Infectious Disease Laboratory in Fort Detrick, as well as the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, in addition to the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg in Canada. It would seem that with the feeling that this could have been genetically engineered on purpose, that this begs of a FBI and Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigation. But then again, if the FBI were to ever engage in a legitimate investigation, that would come to a shock to many people, including a number of FBI agents.
Some startling views there. Wayne Madsen, thanks very much indeed for joining us live from Washington, D.C.
So, let's focus on the vaccines next. Notice how the injectables are held up behind schedule, but the flu mist is in great supply? This next segment is a free world production. We've included it as we found it on YouTube. Listen as Dr. LeBeau explains the extreme danger of the flu mist and its criminal origins by the vaccine manufacturers.
I also had the pleasure of telling them that the flu mist vaccine, which is so widely available in Walmart and so on, and was being made available to, quote, treat seasonal flu, so that if anybody got flu, people would know that it was avian flu, which is beyond insane. That the seasonal, flu mist carried 2 of the 3 DNA packets in the attenuated viruses that it contains, that the H5N1 genetically engineered virus requires to become pandemic. And I also had the privilege of telling them that high doses of vitamin C, now we're talking about 300 grams of vitamin C in IVs per day for 3 days, will prevent the pathogenesis that causes death in humans, which means if humans get the avian flu, any of the strains, that because death occurs through a rapid depletion of vitamin C, which is like a fulminating scurvy, the capillaries and blood vessels of the lungs
shut down.
Allow you to basically drown in your own blood. So if you can supply the vitamin C, then the immune system can kick in about 3 days and take care of the virus.
Well, it's fascinating. This links up with Dr. Pauling's work with vitamin C to a degree, because apparently at the base of most disease is, as you say, incipient scurvy.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. I didn't know. Now, let me say one other thing about H5N1. In the packets of flu mist, you say there were 2 genetic packets in flu mist. So what they were doing was sewing 2 new genetic docking mechanisms for H5N1 in the people that were taking the flu mist. Am I correct?
Precisely. And since people shed the viruses, the attenuated live viruses from the flu mist treatment, or mistreatment, let us say, for up to 3 weeks, anyone who comes into contact with a person who has used flu mist, who is, for instance, a baby, or a person who is on steroids, or a person who has had chemotherapy or other immune suppressive drugs or conditions, and that's about 66 million Americans, becomes vulnerable to infection caused by this supposed inoculum. And in fact, what's happening is that flu and its related types are being spread, and the probability of the change of the H5N1 and related viruses into a pandemic flu is being made far more likely.
Well, they're encouraging the hell out of it.
Absolutely. Now, at the same time, our immune systems are being weakened, as I know you and your listeners know, by the contamination of our food with through irradiation, through antibiotic overuse, through
pesticides, herbicides, hormones, you name it. And then we can throw in the electromagnetic spectrum, which degrades the immune system. We are being set up, folks, for a mass killing. And there's no question about it. It was established by Dr. Nyman, I guess through genetic sequencing, that he was able to get. They've been holding sequencing back, as you know, hiding it, offering to sell it, obfuscating it every step of the way. But he was able to determine that all 3 primary docking sites on the human cell for the influenza virus are now able to take H5N1 with no problem. Now, H7N2 might be the version that does it, but we are being, from what you're saying, intentionally manipulated and set up for a pandemic.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that that impresses me is how difficult it is to kill 90% of the world's population, and how many different techniques they, and they is in capital letters, apparently feel it's necessary to use. We have depleted uranium, we have viruses, we have undernutrition, and I want to point out to people that the World Health Organization, which is a fairly schizophrenic organization, because the men and women who carry out their programs and develop their policies are good people. They're not genocidalists, but the people at the top seem to be quite content being genocidalists.
Well, they wouldn't be there if they weren't.
Exactly, and we have some very interesting corroborating evidence that this is not wild-eyed speculation, but cold, sober, horrible fact.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.